Ladies, we're ready.
Good morning.
Congratulations, when are you due? Good day. Welcome to another episode of Good Day. It's good to see you all. My name is Daniel Bennett. As we start things off, I want to encourage you to go to gooddayGTN.com. Our free giveaway right now is How to Become a Water Walker by Andrew Womack, a free little booklet. You can get the digital or physical copy. If you're watching this way in the future, a rerun or something, or in the archives or any of that, then you can find out what our free giveaway is at that time in the future. Last episode and this episode, I'm talking about imagination. And so I'll be getting to imagination and the power of imagination, why it's valuable, more in a moment. First, I want to start off with a quick little topical, I don't know what to call this, because it's not an in-depth study, but a very surface level topical study. And so last time I talked about being a spy, and we looked at quotes and verses about being spies. And this time I want to talk about violence. Now, that might seem like a weird topic as well. And yes, maybe it's because I was watching some action movies recently. But when I was growing up, I kind of had a romanticized view of violence, right? I mean, because even heroes of the faith, right? David killing Goliath, and so many stories involve violence. And so I thought this is amazing. As I've gotten older and had different life experiences, I hate violence. I completely detest it. And yet I still don't mind it in some fiction because it's not about the violence. It's about the courage or overcoming or stuff like that. So that's why I have anyway, I've changed in how I feel about certain things, but I mean, when you see the value of people, right? Violence loses its luster. To me, it's not this cool, exciting, fun thing. I think it's absolutely terrible. And but let's look at some quotes about violence and some scriptures about violence, because there is a side to it, right? Where God is a protector, right? He's a shepherd. He carries a rod and a staff, and he fights against wolves, right? There's a violent side to protection and being a shepherd, and protecting others is a good, godly thing. It's part of God's nature. So there's a scripture that even says God is a man of war, right? And so it talks about the war side. So there is a violent aspect that I believe there's a holy and good and just version of violence, but then there's the perverted version. In general, it's something that, anyway, we'll look at some quotes here. Well, I won't do the whole teaching on violence right now, but some quotes. So George Washington said, "To be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving peace," right? And that's incredibly important, right? Where if you hate violence, then you actually need to be able to stop it. If you say, I hate it so much that I'll do nothing to stop it and I'll have no power to stop it whatsoever, then you're actually enabling violence. And so that's one of those things. And where is the right balance? People disagree on this very strongly on what's the balance. Do we try to just have so much peace that if someone chooses to be violent, we can't do anything about it? Or do we become even more powerful so that we can stop it, right? Again, if you truly hate violence, you need to be strong enough to stop it. The next quote, "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent," right? So, and again, there's context and all this stuff of you could think of exceptions and all that. But yeah, I think many times when people use violence to get their way, it means that they couldn't think of any other way, that they used they couldn't use logic, they couldn't use reason, they couldn't try to win over ideas, win hearts and minds. And so, we just have to resort to violence. The same can be true even with a violent temper or even just a bad temper. I've talked about this before probably, but I see a temper as a form of blackmail. Even if it's not violence, if it's just yelling or getting angry or giving the silent treatment or withholding kindness, stuff like that. It's a form of blackmail because what you're saying is, if you don't give me what I want, I will treat you badly. I will behave in a way that hurts our relationship. I'll behave in a way that humiliates me and you, but I don't care and so it's a form of blackmail saying, give me what I want, or look, I'll throw a tantrum of some sort. I'll mistreat you. I'll make a scene, whatever else. So that's just blackmail. And that's weakness, right? True strength is when you say, I will treat you kindly because that's who I am, even if you don't deserve it. I've talked about that before, so I'll move on. The third quote here, it says, "Peace cannot be achieved through violence. It can only be attained through understanding." And so I'd say I agree and disagree depending on how you read this, right? Because without strength, you can't actually enforce peace. But at the same time, depending on if you mean internally, like, yeah, you can't use violence to achieve peace internally. Internally, it needs to be revelation, really. I know that's not what Ralph Waldo Emerson was talking about, but it's through our relationship with God that we can have true inner peace. But I'd say in the natural, it's not actually true. Peace can be achieved through violence. In the natural, if you're using violence to stop violence, but your goal is to stop it, not just to perpetuate it and continue the cycle. But again, you got to break the cycle at some point, right? So you got to balance all this stuff out with forgiveness, with understanding, compassion, listening to other people, the whole deal. So some scriptures on violence. Proverbs 3, verse 31. And you could do a much more in-depth study on all this. Proverbs 3:31 says, "Do not envy the oppressor and choose none of his ways." Right? So the oppressor, somebody who's using their violence and their strength to force you to do things you don't want to do. Right? So, maybe another nation forcing a smaller nation to do things. Give us your money, give us your stuff, whatever else. He's saying, don't envy them. Right? Sometimes you see people who are doing things that are unethical or immoral, and it looks like they're getting ahead. And sometimes people secretly are like, I don't like it because I wish I were doing that, not them. I wish I were the oppressor, not them. And he's saying, don't envy them. Don't just say, I wish I could do what they're doing to them. No, go a different path. Find God's way. It says, choose none of his ways, right? The oppressor. Matthew 26, verse 52. But Jesus said to him, put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Again, that's where if you choose a life of violence, then you reap what you sow. So if you live by violence, you'll start reaping violence. And so it's not something that we should be focused on in that sense. Again, at the same time, I think there is a place for it as a preventative force. Romans 12, verse 19. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So, now I personally don't believe that this means there should never be any form of boundaries or consequences. I don't think that's what he's talking about right here, of don't avenge yourselves. I think that means don't try to repay, don't go after vengeance toward other people, but sometimes there need to be consequences, right? I believe police should stop people and put people away for crimes and all that stuff. So I'm not saying that means we should never have any consequences whatsoever, but we shouldn't try to avenge ourselves. We shouldn't take it on ourselves to do things that really only God can deal the justice with. All right, so we're going to move on now and get back to imagination right after this little promo.
Life comes with all kinds of storms. But when your boat is sinking, you might want to step out and learn how to be a water walker. Log on to gooddaygtn.com to get your free copy today.
Well, we're talking about imagination. And in the last episode, I was talking about how there's many different types of imagination. And so even say with storytelling, you can find there's different flavors of imagination where, say, if you read a book, your imagination's filling in a lot of the details. If you're watching a movie, then, a lot of the details are shown to you, but then it's still stirring up your imagination in other ways, right? With maybe your emotions because of the music or what it means to you. And so I'm a big fan of imagination, and I think that we can enjoy life more and learn to appreciate things more if we embrace more flavors of imagination, if we value them instead of just saying, this is my favorite, it's the only one that I like. We can expand our imagination palette, if you will. So then I was also talking about how imagination is a key part of who we are, right? One of the keys to creation is first you imagine, and then you create. So imagination is directly tied to creation. And we see how God imagined us, and then he created us. He made us in his image, imagination, image. And so we are able to imagine and create. So it's very linked to the core essence of who we are on the inside. And so I think it's a mistake to ignore this, because it's, we're not just victims who've been rescued by Jesus. We're beings created in God's image. And there's so much that we'll miss out if we don't truly understand who God made us and what we're capable of, and how we function, how we think. So I want to pick up with Luke chapter 11, verse 34. And so we're talking about how what we focus on affects how we think, and how we think affects what we imagine, and what we imagine affects what we create, right? So Luke 11:34 says, "The lamp of the body is the eye. Therefore, when your eye is good, your whole body is also full of light. But when your eye is bad, your body is also full of darkness." And this refers to what you're physically looking at, but I also think it, in a bigger sense, it means what you're focused on. So what we're focused on affects what's inside of us. And that can either corrupt us, that can defile not our spirit, right? But in our soul, in our mind, and our thoughts. It can be negative or it can be positive. It can be darkness or it can be light. And so what we're focused on. And so again, what you focus on will affect what you imagine. Right? If you find yourself daydreaming about really weird things, or weird things that you aren't godly, then it's because you're sowing something into your heart that isn't godly. You're encouraging and feeding the wrong types of thoughts, and so that's affecting your imagination. And again, your imagination is kind of the core. It's at the core of who you are. So then it starts to lead to what you think about, imagine, daydream, etc. Another scripture on this, Philippians 4, verse 8. Paul says, "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things." Right? And it goes on, "God, peace be with you." Focus on good things. Now, like I said, it's even the Bible has violence in it, has all kinds of sin and wickedness and darkness in it. So it's not that those things, just having those there is evil. But what's the point of it? Are we glorifying that, or are we using it as a lesson? Are we seeing this as a bad thing to run away from, or to overcome, things like that? And so focusing on the good things, and you can go more in depth on that in a different episode. So my next main point is that our desires are born from our imagination. What starts with your imagination, again, imagination leads to creation. So what creates your desires? Your desires are linked to what you imagine. Whatever you're imagining and daydreaming about, that's what births your desires. That's why I don't think stories are a waste of time, and many other art forms aren't a waste of time, because if they affect your imagination, then that affects your desires, and that affects the direction that you go in life. You can probably relate to this, but there's probably books or movies or shows or paintings or songs or things like that have genuinely changed the direction of your life because they had an impact on you. They affect how you think, affect what you daydream about, what you imagine, and that leads to the steps that you take in life. And so our desires are born from our imagination. So imagination is very powerful. And so and warnings are good. Hey, we need to be careful. That's good. But yeah, I prefer to focus on the positive of like, let's grow in this. If imagination is powerful, I don't want to just be warned about it. I want to focus on like, how can I use it in more ways? Can I understand it in more depth? Are there angles and aspects of it that I can embrace that I didn't know about before? And so I like to focus on how far I can run forward, not just the warnings. Psalm 37 verse 4 says, "Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart." Right? So again, delighting yourself in the Lord, him giving you the desires of your heart, this is all tied to imagination. And so, what is it that you delight in? What do you think about? What makes you happy? So this is all involving our imagination, and he gives you the desires of your heart, right? So first, again, if you are meditating on him, it affects what you want, but then he also wants to give you what you want. So he wants to do both. He wants to change your heart, so you want amazing things, and then he wants to give you those amazing things. I was reading a book many years ago. I just recently hit my 10-year anniversary, so this is all probably 20 years ago or so. I was reading a book about dating. And this minister was saying, before you say I do, before you marry somebody, one of the things you should do is find out who they admire. This book with a whole bunch of different tips. said, find out who the person you're interested in admires, because who they admire will give you a clue about what direction they're trying to go. See, again, admiration is tied to imagination. If you admire somebody, it means that there's something about them that you like, or something about them that you wish you were like, or you wish you could do, or something like that. Not necessarily the whole person, but something about them. And so when you find out who someone admires, that's a very good indicator of something on the inside. Like, why do you admire them? What about them? Because even if you don't succeed in reaching what that person's like, it means that there's something about them that draws your imagination. You have desires that connect with something about that person. And so it shows the direction that they're trying to go in life, right? If somebody admires a very evil, selfish person, an arrogant person, then it's like, oh, maybe that's what they see as good. They're trying to become like them. If you admire a very kind and humble person, oh, maybe they're going that way. But again, it can be even more nuanced than that. That's good advice for marriage and dating, but it's beyond that. You know, we can use this in many types of relationships, but we can use it for ourselves also, right? Who do you admire? What do you admire? And kind of think about it. Why? What about it? Because that'll kind of show you what you daydream about, what you secretly wish. It might help you realize things that you want that you didn't realize you wanted. It's not just on the surface, right? Like I might admire an amazing guitar player, and that's amazing, but it's not that I want to play guitar. It's that I love how passionate they are about their craft, their art. And that spirit of excellence and passion in the way that they can just fully express themselves because they reach such a level where they're only limited by their imagination. I love that, but I don't want to play guitar. I want to have that same passion towards something that I like to do. So it's not always one for one. It's usually under the surface where it's like, I admire this about that person or about that thing. And so, again, admiration is closely tied to daydreaming, which is tied to, imagination. It can reveal a lot about your heart. And the thing is, if you don't like what you see, if you're like, I admire this person because they always get what they want, okay? Or, if you admire someone who's rich and famous and powerful and gets to be arrogant and you're like, I want that too. And you realize, oh, I shouldn't want that. Okay, well, if you realize you don't like what you want, then change it, right? Ask God for help. Say, what lie am I believing that I would desire something that's not from you? So I want to give an example here of, we can't imagine what God has planned for us, right? The scripture says in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9, 1 Corinthians 2:9, as it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. Right? So I'm talking about how powerful imagination is, and here it says you can't imagine it. Okay, but I still like to try. Right? If God says you can't imagine how good my plans are for you and what I have in store for you in eternity, I'm like, okay, challenge accepted. I'll do my best to imagine the most amazing things ever. And I fully know though that it won't even measure up. That you'll still surprise me. It'll be better than I imagined. So I still like to try. And I think there's value in that. I think it's good to imagine things even if you know you won't be able to understand. And I want to give an example of King David, right? So King David was in the same boat. He was in the old covenant and he couldn't imagine the new covenant. He had no idea what God had in store in the new covenant. So Matthew 13, verse 17, Matthew 13:17 says, assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Right? I think that includes David, that he was a prophet and a king and a righteous man. He wanted to see what we see. He wanted to hear what we get to hear, and he didn't get to. He had to imagine. He had no clue what God had in store for the new covenant. I can't say he had no clues because he was prophesying about Jesus all the time, but he didn't get to hear it. He had to guess and hope and look forward to and try to guess. Because see, look at Psalm 27, verse 4. He said, one thing I have desired of the Lord, that I will seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. And he was imagining being in God's presence in his house, in his temple forever. And what God actually had in mind was so much better than that, right? Where we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. He's like, you don't have to live in my house. I'm going to make you my house. I'm going to live inside of you, which is way better than you being in my house. Or you don't just get to be close to my presence gets to be inside of you. So David had no clue, and yet he had this amazing relationship with God, right? He had one of the closest, maybe the closest walk with God in the old covenant that anybody had, because he was imagining. He's saying even though he guessed wrong, the fact that he was imagining still inspired him to keep knowing God in ways that most people never got to know him. And really, he even stepped into things beyond the covenant, where he was stepping into things that weren't guaranteed for everybody, but he just pushed into levels of relationship with God that other people didn't have. So in the same way, I can't predict what eternity is going to be like, but I still like to imagine it because my imagination causes me to move in that direction. Even though I know I'm going to guess wrong, it's still exciting to think, man, I wonder what are the limits with God? How good could life with God be in this lifetime? How much could I know him in this lifetime? How much power could I walk in? How kind could I be? How loving could I be? How wise could I be? And just imagining, and that leads you in that direction. So your imagination is powerful, even if your imagination is wrong. It's more about the direction than about getting it right. And so we might get some details wrong, but it affects us. You know, my boys right now, and my daughter, they love to pretend they're superheroes. My daughter usually pretends she's a princess or something. And my boys sometimes pretend they're princes and the whole deal. But my boys especially love pretending they're superheroes, like Thor and Hulk and Captain America and Spider-Man and whatever else. They have costumes and they jump around. And so, you know, don't tell them I said this, but it's very unlikely they'll actually become superheroes of that sort, right? Or they have superpowers and they go around fighting crime and fighting aliens, right? So even though that might not happen, it's not a waste of time. See, what's happening beneath the surface? They're imagining that they're strong. They're imagining that they're brave. They're imagining that they do good and they help other people. They're imagining that they stop bad people, that they are putting themselves at risk to help others. So they're imagining all these pure and noble and good things. And so even though they may not become the Incredible Hulk when they're older, if you don't imagine having amazing character and having amazing courage and being brave and being strong and and not giving up even when the odds are against you, if you never imagine that, you'll never become that. Because again, if you imagine first and then you create it, it's not just for things like art. It's also for your character, for your identity, for how you see yourself, how you carry yourself in this world. So that's why I think inspiration is so important, is that inspiration is not just head knowledge. Inspiration can affect who we become, right? I mean, even Andrew's talked about how, before he ever raised anybody from the dead, he would imagine it, he would dream about it, he'd think about it, and so it's something, if you never imagine something, you'll never go there. So it's incredibly powerful, even if on the surface it's not there, right? And that's why I love seeing my kids. Like my daughter loves imagining that she's this princess and she's kind and beautiful and all these things. And it's like, unless I somehow find out I'm the king of some country, she'll never technically become a princess in this world. She absolutely is my princess and God's princess, but it's under the surface of being kind and beautiful and gracious and wise and all these wonderful things and going on adventures and all this kind of stuff. So imagination is very, very powerful and important. And it's not silly, right? It's not childish, it's childlike. It's a good thing to have an imagination. It's a good thing to daydream about, man, I wish someday I could do this. I wish someday I could do that. As long as we don't let it just become all dreams, right? If you're just a dreamer, then that's not a good thing. But the good use is I'm a dreamer and then I try and do it, right? I want that, I'm gonna try and do it. I wanna become like that, not just dream about it. So, our imagination determines our direction in life, and it's very powerful and important. It's not the only ingredient. You can't just imagine all day long, but it is a necessary ingredient, and then you go from imagination to walking it out and staying inspired, right? Hebrews 11 verse 1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, right? See, imagination and hope are tied together. If you're hoping for something, what's that mean? It means you're imagining a good outcome and you're expecting it, right? So it's all this imagination. You're expecting something that you're imagining. I think that I'll be saved. I think that this problem will be solved. I think that this opportunity will happen. You hope things. You can't have faith if you don't first hope. And that's tied to our imagination. So that's why it's so important to have a holy, redeemed spirit, our eyes being open in the spirit, having all that affect our imagination, because that affects what we hope for and that affects what we can believe God for. So anyway, to wrap this up again, like I said, there's many different types of imagination. It's a key part of who we are. We are imaginers, we're creators. That's how God designed us. That's what He's like. We imagine, we create. It affects who we are, what direction we're going, right? Our imagination determines our desires, and our desires determine our direction in life. And so, anyway, I encourage you to think about this. I mean, if you haven't imagined in a long time, think to yourself, when you were a kid, what did you used to imagine? That might remind you of some core desires that you had that you might forget. And maybe, if when you were a kid, you imagined being an astronaut. Okay, maybe you'll never become an astronaut. Maybe some of you will. But say you're already, too old for that or something. You might not become an astronaut, but why did you dream about being an astronaut? And it might be exploration, discovery, doing something really difficult, doing something really cool. And so those things can still happen. And so there's a reason why those were dreams in your heart. So I hope that's helpful. And I'm going to wrap up with some Q&A here before we wrap up this episode. Let's see here. Where am I? What is the most valuable thing I can learn right now to ensure my future success? I would say one of the most important things to learn is how to learn and how to grow. If you know how to learn and how to grow, then you can continually do that, because you'll need to keep doing that the rest of your life. Success isn't a destination. It's not just a destination. It's much more of like a way of life. And we should, no matter where we are in life, we should always be enjoying where we are, but also investing in moving toward more. So we should always be learning and growing. I don't think we should ever just plateau and say, I'm done learning, I'm done growing. I think there's always more to do. So I think learning how to keep going is one of the keys. Also, I would say, I've said this before, but learning how to get back up. If you mess up, if you make a mistake, if you accidentally waste time, get back up. If you want to succeed, one of the biggest keys in life is learn to get back up, right? If you do something and you mess up, if you try to be bold and you get embarrassed, whatever it is, just get back up, do it again. If you can get back up, then nothing can stop you, right? Okay, so how do I identify my passion and make a career out of it? Well, there's a lot you could say to this, but try a lot of different things. There's things that might surprise you until you try something. I was just talking with my wife yesterday that when I lived in Russia, a lot of the students there, a lot of the people I was friends with there were training to become doctors. And what was cool was they were at a stage, many of them were at a stage where they had to decide what their specialty was going to be. And so they would try different things. And then some of them realized, I thought I was interested in being a pediatrician, but actually I became really interested in being an ear, nose, throat doctor. Or I thought I was going to be really interested in brain surgery, and it turns out I enjoy heart surgery, right? And it was just kind of cool to be like, I'm going to try a bunch of different things, and for some reason this one caught my imagination or that one looked more fun to me. And so I'd say try a lot of different things, like even in ministry or whatever else in careers, serve in many different ways, and then you get experience and you find out which ones do you feel most passionate about, which ones do you feel most fruitful in and talented in, and that can help you figure it out. So I hope that's helpful. Again, before you go, I encourage you to go to gooddaygtn.com to get this free booklet, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.